"Please don't hurt me, I can't walk," begged the rancher's bride. Then the mountain man changed everything. The woman's voice echoed through the rugged canyon pass, raw with desperation and terror. Moonlight cast silver shadows across the rocky terrain, illuminating her trembling form beneath the towering pine trees. A horse's hooves thundered behind the figure approaching her, casting his imposing silhouette against the canyon walls like a predatory beast. The man's stride was measured, menacing, his leather gloves creaking as he flexed his fists, his breathing harsh in the mountain air. She pressed herself against the cold stone, her ivory wedding dress torn and stained with mud and tears, auburn hair matted against her face. Her right leg was twisted beneath her, the bone clearly fractured from her fall down the rocky slope. She gasped, attempting to crawl away, but agony shot through her limb like wildfire. "Hello, my dear friend. This is Jasper Ashwood, your narrator of Mountain Tales. Before we start, make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below telling me where you're tuning in from. A big hug to you all, and I hope you enjoy the story." At that precise moment, from behind a cluster of weathered boulders, a figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying a small girl wrapped in a faded red flannel coat. His buckskin jacket was weathered, his boots caked with mountain soil, his expression weary from a long day's hunt. But when he heard that voice, so broken, so desperate, he stopped dead in his tracks. The little girl stirred in his powerful arms. "Papa, is that lady gonna die?" she whispered with concern. The man set her carefully on a fallen log. "Stay right here, Rosemarie," he said quietly but with unwavering authority. She nodded solemnly, clutching a small wooden doll to her chest. Without a moment's hesitation, he stepped forward into the canyon clearing. His voice boomed across the rocks, deep and commanding. "Back away from her, now." The man looming over the woman spun around, momentarily caught off guard. Tension crackled in the crisp mountain air, but the stranger's eyes, steel-gray, unwavering, penetrating, locked onto him with deadly certainty. There was something in that mountain man's gaze that froze the aggressor's blood. Not panic, not fury, just cold, absolute resolve. The would-be attacker stumbled backward, then another step, and without uttering a single word, he mounted his horse and disappeared into the darkness of the mountain trail. The auburn-haired woman blinked in stunned disbelief, her breathing ragged as the mountain man approached. Her body shook, not just from pain, but from overwhelming shock. Little Rosemarie peered from behind the boulder, her wide eyes reflecting the starlight as thunder rumbled across the peaks. The man knelt beside the injured woman, his voice gentle now. "You're safe now, ma'am. I've got you." She stared up at him, lips trembling, unable to form words. She didn't yet know his name was Caleb. But in that moment everything shifted. And though she couldn't stand, though she was broken and battered, she had just been truly seen for the first time in her life, and her entire world was about to transform forever. Caleb Thornfield lived in a hand-built cabin nestled deep in the Colorado Rockies, where the wind sang through the pines and eagle calls echoed off granite peaks. At 34 years old, his life had been forever divided into before and after he lost his beloved wife, Sarah. 3 years ago, mountain fever took her swiftly, mercilessly. Since then, everything revolved around Rosemarie. He worked as a wilderness guide and fur trapper, taking contracts that brought in just enough to keep their cabin warm and their bellies full. Most days he smelled like pine smoke and leather, but he never complained. As long as Rosemarie had her books, hearty meals, and a secure roof over her head, he could endure the aching loneliness and the constant worry about their future. Years before, Caleb had worn a different kind of responsibility. He was a cavalry scout, a mountain rescue specialist with nerves of iron and instincts honed by countless dangerous missions. There was a jagged scar across his right shoulder, a memento from a grisly attack where he'd saved a lost mining family from certain death. He rarely spoke of those days. Some memories were meant to be honored in silence. They were burdens carried quietly in a man's heart. Now he carried his daughter, Rosemarie, 7 years old, with flowing chestnut curls and a laugh that could chase away the deepest mountain shadows. She never ventured anywhere without her treasured collection of pressed wildflowers. "Nature's colors tell stories," she would say with the wisdom of an old soul. She adorned their cabin with her discoveries: lupines, Indian paintbrush, columbines, each one carefully preserved between the pages of her mother's old Bible. Her world was small but radiant with wonder. That moonlit night, Caleb had promised her a special treat, wild honey from the high meadows if she helped him check the trap lines without complaint. They had just emerged from a narrow canyon passage when they heard it. A scream, a woman's voice pleading, desperate. That same night, Victoria Ashworth had not planned to flee. But when her betrothed Marcus Blackwood, the ruthless cattle baron who controlled half the territory, barricaded the ranch house door and began making threats, something inside her finally rebelled. For months, he had been pressuring her to sign over her family's ancestral land rights to his expanding empire. The marriage had been arranged by her dying father, a strategic alliance to secure water rights and grazing lands across the valley. But Victoria was not born to be caged. She refused his demands, and when his hand struck her face, she grabbed the leather satchel containing the original land deeds and fled barefoot into the mountain wilderness. She had never run like that before. Not through rocky terrain, not with her heart pounding like a frightened deer. She stumbled, her leg caught between two boulders. She fell hard onto the unforgiving stone. Still, she held that satchel against her chest as if it contained her very soul. Because it did. Her breath came in desperate gasps. The agony in her leg blurred her vision. Her beautiful wedding gown was destroyed, the silk torn and soaked with mountain dew. Her jewelry had been lost somewhere along the treacherous path. The man she once trusted was closing in. She could hear his horse's hooves echoing off the canyon walls, and that was when she saw him. Caleb carried her through the mountain darkness in complete silence. The moon had reached its peak by the time they arrived at his cabin. Victoria's body trembled from cold and trauma. She clutched the leather satchel against her chest, her grip unwavering even as pain radiated from her shattered leg. Caleb said nothing, only adjusted her in his strong arms to shield her from the mountain wind. "Easy now," he murmured, gently lowering her onto his handmade wooden couch. "You're safe in my home." Rosemarie appeared moments later, tiptoeing through the doorway in her small moccasins. She held her wooden doll in one arm and studied Victoria with solemn curiosity. Her gaze wasn't fearful, just intensely serious. The kind of seriousness only a child who has known loss can possess. Then she tilted her head thoughtfully and asked, "Papa, why is she crying the same way I did when Mama went to heaven?" Caleb froze completely. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. She turned her face away, as if those innocent words had pierced something she didn't know existed within her. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the rough-hewn couch. She wanted to respond, but couldn't find her voice. "She's had a mighty hard day, little one," Caleb said softly. "Sometimes grown folks cry too, just like children do." Rosemarie nodded with understanding beyond her years, then wandered toward her small bedroom, her moccasins silent on the wooden floor. Caleb brought a clean woolen blanket and wrapped it tenderly around Victoria's shoulders. "I'll brew you some mountain tea, pine needle and chamomile. It'll help." She nodded wordlessly. He disappeared into the small kitchen area. Victoria leaned back into the hand-carved cushions, still damp, still cold to her bones. Her leg throbbed with each heartbeat. Her spirit ached even worse. She had been in grand mansions, luxury hotels, elaborate drawing rooms lined with imported furnishings. None of those places had felt like this. Humble, imperfect, but filled with something she couldn't identify. It both terrified and comforted her. In the depths of the mountain night, Victoria awakened with a sharp intake of breath. The cabin was dark, except for the soft glow of dying embers in the stone fireplace. Her leg pulsed with steady pain, but it seemed more manageable now. Perfect silence enveloped the cabin. No pursuing horses, no angry shouts behind her, no one demanding her submission. She sat up slowly, uncertain how many hours had passed. The woolen blanket that had covered her had slipped to the wooden floor. Her precious satchel, still gripped tightly even in sleep, rested beside her on the couch. Guilt weighed heavily on her conscience. She had invaded a stranger's peaceful life, disrupted everything. She had no right to burden him with her troubles. Slowly she rose, biting back a sharp cry as her injured foot touched the cold floor. She limped toward the cabin door, hoping to disappear before dawn broke over the mountains. No explanations, no gratitude, just vanish like morning mist. But as she reached for her torn slippers by the entrance, she stopped in amazement. They weren't damaged anymore. They had been carefully mended and cleaned. The torn leather had been stitched with precise, caring hands. Next to them sat a folded woolen cloth, still warm from the fire. On top of it lay a small piece of bark paper. The handwriting was rough but steady, written with charcoal. "Your leg ain't healed yet. You can stay as long as you need. It's no trouble. Victoria stared at those words for a long moment. No conditions, no expectations, no hidden price, just simple mountain kindness. She sank slowly to the wooden floor, the bark paper trembling in her hands. All her life she had fought to prove her worth, to be refined enough, smart enough, obedient enough. But here, in a modest cabin with gaps between the logs and wildflower drawings covering every surface, she felt something she had never experienced in her gilded world, acceptance for nothing more than simply existing. The first morning after her rescue, Victoria awakened to the gentle crackling of the fireplace and the soft sounds of cooking from the small kitchen area. For a moment, she imagined she was still in her father's ranch house with servants preparing breakfast according to strict schedule. But then she saw the simple couch beneath her, the hand-sewn curtains fluttering in the mountain breeze, and the pressed flowers arranged across the wooden mantelpiece. She was no longer in her world of wealth and expectations. Caleb appeared carrying a steaming wooden mug. He placed it on the small table beside her. The rich aroma of pine and herbs filled the cabin air. "Drink this down," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "It'll help with the pain and swelling." She sat up carefully, testing her injured leg. It still throbbed constantly, but the swelling had decreased noticeably since the previous night. She sipped the tea slowly. It was earthy, strong, surprisingly soothing. "You made this yourself?" she asked, genuinely amazed. "Old Mountain way," he replied, settling down on the edge of a wooden stool with clean bandages. "Pine needle tea, pure spring water, steady hands. That's all healing really takes sometimes." Without another word, he gently lifted her injured foot onto his lap. His touch was confident but careful, never presumptuous, never invasive. He removed the old wrapping, cleaned the wound with remarkable gentleness, and began to apply fresh bandages. Victoria watched in complete silence. She had been surrounded by physicians and attendants for years, but none of them had ever tended to her like this, not with patience, not with genuine attention, not without expectation of payment. "You've done this many times before," she murmured with quiet observation. He nodded once. "Mountain rescue work, mining accidents, bear attacks. You learn to stay calm even when everything inside you is falling apart." Her eyes softened with understanding. She wanted to ask more about his past, but before she could speak, he reached for her torn wedding dress. Damaged from her desperate flight through the wilderness, he pulled a small sewing kit from a wooden shelf and began threading a needle with practiced precision. "You don't need to do that," she started to protest. "I know," he interrupted gently, "but beautiful things are worth fixing properly." The stitches were slightly uneven, the thread imperfect. Still, he worked with such focused concentration that something deep in Victoria's chest cracked open. The tears came suddenly, uncontrollable. She covered her face with both hands, ashamed of her emotional breakdown. Caleb paused his mending immediately. "Did I hurt you, ma'am?" She shook her head vigorously, her voice breaking with emotion. "No, I'm not used to this, being cared for like this." He didn't pressure her to explain further. He simply handed her a clean cloth and said quietly, "Every person deserves kindness, especially you." That was when small footsteps crossed the wooden floor. Rose Marie appeared, her hair in loose chestnut braids, her nightgown decorated with tiny embroidered flowers. She held a piece of bark paper tightly against her small chest. Without any hesitation, she walked directly over and placed it carefully in Victoria's lap. "This is for you, miss," Rose Marie said with shy pride. Victoria unfolded the paper slowly. It was a charcoal drawing, simple but expressive, showing a tall man with dark hair, a little girl in moccasins, and beside them, an empty outline of a woman with long flowing hair. Confused, Victoria looked up at the child. "Who is this supposed to be?" Rose Marie smiled brightly, pointing at the empty figure. "That's you, miss. I left that space empty for such a long time, waiting for someone who belonged with us. I think maybe it's supposed to be you now." Victoria's throat constricted with emotion. Her hands shook as she held the precious drawing. "Sweetheart," she whispered, struggling to find appropriate words. "Why would you choose me?" "Because you're here now," Rose Marie answered with simple childhood logic. "And you look like someone who needs a family real bad." Victoria let out a sound that was half laughter, half sob. She pressed the drawing against her heart, as tears flowed freely down her cheeks. For so long, her life had been a battlefield of business arrangements, property disputes, and social expectations. She had been defined by bloodlines, wealth, and appearances. No one had ever saved a place for her, only made demands for what she must become. Yet here, in this rustic cabin with rough wooden walls and the sound of a child's charcoal scratching across bark paper, she was being offered something she had never known, a genuine place to belong. She looked at Caleb, who stood quietly in the kitchen doorway observing the exchange. His expression was unreadable, but his grey eyes told her everything she needed to know: acceptance, patience, and a quiet hope that he dared not voice aloud. Caleb understood the fragility of new beginnings. Victoria turned back to Rose-Marie, managing a genuine smile through her tears. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me." Rose-Marie giggled with delight and picked up her piece of charcoal. "Then I'll make it official. Blue dress, right?" Victoria nodded, laughing softly through her tears. "Yes, make it blue like the mountain sky." And as Rose-Marie filled in the empty outline with bold strokes of color, Victoria felt something shift inside her. Something warm, something alive and growing. For the first time in her entire life, she understood what it truly meant to belong somewhere. Victoria's leg was healing gradually. Each morning brought slightly more strength, slightly less constant pain. But walking remained extremely difficult. She despised the feeling of helplessness, of needing assistance. But Caleb never made her feel diminished because of it. He offered his strong arm without words, let her lean on him as they moved around the cabin. When she stumbled, he steadied her. When she winced with pain, he paused and waited. There was no pity in his actions, just presence and endless patience. "Just one step at a time," he would say gently, his voice low and reassuring. Victoria would nod, focusing on the rhythm of their movement together. Step, breathe, balance. It became their quiet ritual, a dance of trust that neither of them named out loud. One bright Sunday morning, Rose-Marie announced it was time to make flapjacks. "Papa makes them just fine," she said, with an exaggerated shrug. "But I bet Miss Victoria makes them fancy and special." "I wouldn't count on that," Victoria warned with a self-deprecating smile. "I've never actually cooked anything myself in my entire life." Rose-Marie's eyes widened in complete amazement. "Never ever? Never? Not even simple toast?" Caleb raised an eyebrow with amusement. "Well, that's about to change right now." They gathered in the small kitchen area, elbows bumping as they mixed batter in a chipped ceramic bowl. Rose-Marie stood on a wooden crate to reach the counter, her curls bouncing with excitement as she gave detailed instructions like a seasoned frontier cook. "More buttermilk, not too many eggs, and wait for the bubbles before you flip them over." Victoria tried desperately to follow the directions, but the first flapjack stuck hopelessly to the pan. The second one folded in on itself like a sad envelope. The third one somehow managed to catch fire completely. Caleb quickly snatched the iron skillet off the fire, waving a dish towel at the thin trail of smoke. "I think that burnt one's definitely yours," he joked, nudging the blackened disaster toward Victoria's wooden plate. They all erupted in laughter, real, deep belly laughter that came from pure joy, loud and completely unguarded. It filled the small cabin like warm sunshine. When they finally sat down to eat their breakfast, the flapjacks were uneven, slightly burnt, some even raw in the middle, but Rose-Marie grinned widely as she took a big bite. "These are silly flapjacks," she declared with authority. "But silly is the very best kind." They ate slowly, letting the golden morning light pour through the cabin windows. Outside, the mountain wilderness stretched endlessly, but inside, time seemed to slow and soften. Rose-Marie chattered enthusiastically about her nature walks, how she'd almost caught a butterfly, how she'd found a perfect pine cone, how she'd told the trading post clerk that Victoria was her maybe new mama. Victoria froze for half a second, eyes meeting Caleb's across the rough wooden table. He didn't react with surprise, just reached over and poured more wild honey onto Rose-Marie's plate, like it was the most natural thing in the world. That evening, after Rose-Marie had fallen asleep surrounded by her pressed flowers and wooden toys, Victoria and Caleb sat on the cabin's front porch, watching the soft twinkle of stars emerging over the mountain peaks. The oil lamp was extinguished. The comfortable silence between them was full, not empty. Victoria pulled the woolen blanket closer around her shoulders, her body still tired from practicing walking earlier that day. Without thinking, she leaned sideways and rested her head on Caleb's broad shoulder. He didn't move away. She could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her cheek, the warmth of his presence anchoring her to something real. "You don't realize," she whispered into the mountain night, "but you've saved me from so many terrible things." Her voice was barely more than breath, but he heard every word clearly. He didn't turn to look at her, didn't ask what she meant by that. He simply said, "I didn't save anybody, I just saw someone who needed help." She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of pine and leather that seemed to surround him. That answer, quiet, honest, completely unheroic, cut through all the noise and confusion she'd lived with for years. No one had ever looked at her and seen simply a person before. They had seen opportunity, strategy, success, a means to an end. But Caleb, this mountain man, he saw someone who was hurting, and instead of walking away, he chose to stay. And that, she realized with startling clarity, was what love might actually be. Not grand romantic gestures, but the willingness to stand still with someone until they could walk again on their own. It began with the sound of horses approaching through the mountain pass, then voices echoing off the canyon walls, then the unmistakable knock on the cabin door. Loud, demanding, too familiar for comfort. Victoria froze completely, her hands still sudsy from washing their breakfast dishes. Caleb glanced through the small window, then quickly pulled the curtain closed. "Don't move from this spot," he said with calm authority. She didn't need to ask why. The moment she saw the group of well-dressed riders gathered outside the cabin, she knew they had finally found her. Within hours, more arrived from the valley below. A newspaper reporter, a woman in an expensive riding habit with a notepad, a man representing the territorial government wearing a badge that screamed, "Official business." The clearing around the cabin became a small spectacle of unwanted attention. Caleb stood by the door, arms folded across his broad chest, his body completely blocking the entrance. From the bedroom, Rose Marie's worried voice called out softly, "Why are all those people outside our home?" "It's nothing to worry about, little one," Victoria said, trying to keep her voice steady and calm. "They're just lost travelers who took a wrong turn." Later that evening, as the visitors grew tired and the persistent knocking finally faded into mountain silence, Victoria received a message delivered by the territorial representative. An offer, an extremely generous one. Thousands of dollars in immediate payment, complete restoration of her social standing, legal protection, reputation management services. All she had to do was return to the valley, sign the marriage contracts, smile for the photographers, and pretend none of her rebellion had ever happened. She stared at the official document for a very long time. Then she closed the leather portfolio and walked into the kitchen where Caleb stood drying a wooden bowl with an old checkered cloth. "I'm not going back down there," she said with quiet determination. He didn't look up immediately. "You certain about that decision?" "Yes," she said firmly. "I've been offered more money than most people see in a lifetime. But not once in all those years of wealth did I wake up feeling like I do here in this cabin." He turned to face her, his grey eyes serious and searching. "How exactly do you feel here?" She hesitated, then answered from her heart. "Real, seen, safe, loved." He nodded once with understanding. That was all the confirmation he needed to hear. By dawn the next morning they had packed their few belongings. Caleb loaded Rose Marie into his sturdy mountain wagon and drove them deeper into the wilderness, along winding trails lined with aspen trees that had just begun to turn gold with the approaching autumn. They arrived at a remote valley where Caleb's older brother Samuel ran a small but thriving horse ranch, tucked between rolling meadows and towering peaks. Samuel took one look at Victoria, didn't ask any questions about her past, and said simply, "There's fresh venison in the smokehouse and a comfortable bed in the guest cabin." That night, under a canopy of countless stars and profound silence, Victoria and Caleb sat on the ranch porch, a hand-stitched quilt draped over their knees. "I used to believe I had everything a person could want," she said quietly. "Position, property, influence." He said nothing, just waited for her to continue. "And yet," she continued, "it was all completely hollow. I didn't realize how much of myself I had surrendered, just to be seen as successful by others." Caleb took a slow sip of his coffee, then spoke thoughtfully. "They only saw your name and your money, never you." She nodded with recognition. "Exactly right." He looked out across the moonlit meadow, his voice quiet with memory. "I understand what that's like, to be seen as something you're not." She turned to study his profile. "Tell me about it." He took a long, deep breath. There was an avalanche. Several years back. Small mining camp got buried. I was the first to reach them. Pulled 3 men out alive. She could hear the tightness creeping into his voice now. But there was a 4th man. A young father. I did everything I could, but it wasn't enough to save him. She reached for his calloused hand. You still carry that burden, don't you? He nodded slowly. Every single day. There was no need to say more about it. The silence between them was not heavy with awkwardness. It was shared, honored, understood. She didn't fill it with meaningless apologies. He didn't fill it with false bravado. They simply sat there together, their fingers intertwined under the vast night sky. 2 people who had each lost something precious, and now quietly had begun to find something else equally precious. They didn't speak of love or make promises about the future, but when Caleb glanced at her and she met his eyes without flinching, they both understood with perfect clarity. They were waiting for each other, and neither of them was waiting alone anymore. The territorial courthouse was colder than she remembered, not in temperature, but in the energy that seemed to drain warmth from everything it touched. Polished stone floors, imposing wooden benches, and iron fixtures reflected every sterile inch of the space where Victoria Ashworth had once commanded respect with just her family name. Now she limped. Her steps echoed in uneven rhythm across the marble, one boot slightly dragging from her still healing leg. She wore no elaborate gown, no expensive jewelry, just a clean cotton dress and determination burning in her green eyes like wildfire refusing to be extinguished. Every head in the courthouse turned to stare. The whispers started immediately throughout the crowded gallery. She actually came back. She really showed up. What could she possibly be thinking? But no one dared to stop her determined progress down the center aisle. Marcus Blackwood stood at the front of the courtroom, smug and relaxed in the plaintiff's chair that should have belonged to her family. He smirked with cruel satisfaction, leaning toward his expensive attorney. "Miss Ashworth," he said with false politeness that dripped like poison, "how completely unexpected. I assumed you'd finally accepted your proper place as my obedient wife." Victoria didn't flinch or hesitate. She walked straight to the center of the courtroom, steadying herself with one hand on the wooden rail as she faced the crowd of ranchers, businessmen, and former family allies. Her voice was clear, unshaken, carrying to every corner of the room. "I came back to finish this the right way, legally and publicly." Marcus opened his mouth to interrupt, but she raised her hand with calm, quiet authority, the kind she used to wield like a finely sharpened blade. "I may not walk the same way I used to," she said, glancing briefly at her injured leg, "but I stand taller now because I stand for myself and my family's legacy." The courtroom hushed to complete silence. With one decisive movement, she opened her leather satchel and placed documents on the evidence table. Land deeds, water rights, mineral claims, all of it legally documented and properly witnessed. Proof of the fraudulent contracts, manipulated signatures, and the systematic theft orchestrated by Marcus and several territorial officials. Gasps broke the stunned silence. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats as the implications became clear. Victoria turned slowly, making direct eye contact with every person in the courtroom. "You thought I disappeared because I was weak and defeated," she said with growing strength. "But I left because I needed space to remember who I was, before you all convinced me I had to be someone else entirely." Marcus stood abruptly, trying desperately to regain control of the situation. "This is completely reckless and illegal. Do you have any idea what this rebellion could cost you?" She looked at him, really looked, and saw for the first time how truly small and pathetic he was beneath all his bluster and threats. "I do know exactly what it will cost," she said steadily, "and I'm ready to pay that price." She pulled out a final document from her satchel and placed it on the judge's bench with deliberate precision. "This is my formal dissolution of our engagement contract. Effective immediately, I am relinquishing any claim to a marriage that was built on lies and intimidation." The silence that followed was thunderous, echoing off the courthouse walls like a mountain avalanche. "You can keep your cattle empire, your political connections, your kingdom built on fear and manipulation," she added with growing conviction, "but I will never again be part of it." One of the older ranchers, a weathered man who had known her father since childhood, leaned forward with emotion thick in his voice. "Victoria, girl, why throw it all away?" Victoria's voice softened, but gained even more strength and resolve. "Because I am not property to be bought and sold. I am not a business transaction in someone else's game. I am a free woman with my own mind and my own choices. The old rancher nodded slowly, blinking back tears of understanding. Marcus, still standing, tried one final desperate time. You'll regret this decision for the rest of your life. You're throwing away everything your family built. Victoria gave him one last look, filled with pity rather than anger. No, she said with absolute certainty. I'm walking away from something that never truly belonged to me in the first place. I'm choosing something real instead. She gathered her satchel and remaining documents with quiet grace and dignity. As she walked out, step by limping step, no one dared to stop her or challenge her decision. Not this time, not ever again. And when the courthouse doors closed behind her with finality, she didn't cry tears of regret. She didn't tremble with fear. She exhaled with pure relief and freedom. Outside, the sun had begun to set behind the mountain peaks. The valley below glowed with amber and rose light. The settlement bustled with evening life and activity. Victoria stepped onto the wooden sidewalk, not as a rancher's bride, but as a woman who had finally chosen herself over everything else. And for the first time in her entire life, her shoulders weren't carrying the weight of other people's expectations, only her own truth and dignity. And that was more than enough to build a life upon. When Victoria returned to the mountain ranch, it was exactly as she remembered, simple, warm, and alive with quiet joy and contentment. The late afternoon sun spilled through the cabin windows, casting golden rays across the wooden floors. On the front porch, Caleb was crouched beside several wooden planters, helping Rose-Marie transplant some wild mountain flowers they had gathered, their hands dirty with rich soil and determination. Victoria stood silently in the doorway, watching them work together, her heart overflowing with love. She stepped outside slowly, her voice tender with emotion. "Do you have room for one more gardener in this family?" Caleb looked up, his weathered face lighting up, not with surprise but with the calm certainty of someone who had been patiently waiting and hoping. He nodded once with conviction. "Always room for you." Rose-Marie ran to Victoria immediately, soil smudged across her cheek, and a proud grin stretched wide across her face. "We're planting new flowers today for our forever garden. This purple one's going to be beautiful. You can choose the next color we plant." Victoria knelt beside them and dug her hands deep into the mountain earth. There, in the quiet act of planting something new together, she felt her own roots finally take hold in soil that would nourish her soul. Days passed into weeks, and Victoria poured all her energy and passion into something she had only dreamed of during her years of captivity: the Rose-Marie Foundation, a sanctuary organization for women who had been manipulated, abused, or discarded by powerful men and corrupt systems like the one she had escaped from. Caleb helped build the wooden structures and corrals. Rose-Marie insisted on the name with typical childhood logic. "Because flowers grow better when they have sunshine and love and good dirt," Rose-Marie explained with authority. "And ladies need the same things to grow strong again." At the center of the Rose-Marie Foundation's mission was this simple but revolutionary idea. No woman should have to earn safety or beg for basic kindness and respect. The world had failed so many women for so long. Victoria was determined to help rewrite that story, one rescued woman at a time. One peaceful evening, after dinner and another messy round of flapjack cooking lessons, the three of them curled up together on the porch swing. Rose-Marie nestled securely into Victoria's side, her collection of pressed flowers and drawings scattered across the wooden table. The gentle sounds of the mountain evening drifted around them like a lullaby. Rose-Marie turned to Victoria with characteristic seriousness. "Will you stay here with us forever and ever?" Victoria looked into those bright, hopeful eyes that held such trust. "I drew you into our family already," Rose-Marie added, lifting a newer picture from her pile. 3 stick figures stood in front of a flower garden bursting with color. One tall man, one little girl, and one woman with flowing hair in a bright blue dress. "I don't want to have to erase you later if you leave us," Rose-Marie whispered with vulnerability that broke Victoria's heart. Victoria's throat tightened with overwhelming emotion. She pulled Rose-Marie close against her heart and whispered, "If you ever need me, sweetheart, I will always be here with you. That's a promise I will never break." Later that night, when Rose-Marie was fast asleep, Caleb found Victoria on the porch, gazing out over the moonlit valley. "I have something special for you," he said, stepping beside her with quiet anticipation. From his shirt pocket, he pulled a small bracelet woven from colorful wildflower stems, uneven, but clearly made with great care and love. Victoria took it gently, her eyes filling with tears. "Rosemarie made it today," he explained with a smile. "She called it a commitment bracelet." He paused, his voice growing more serious. "She said it's not a wedding ring yet, but she was wondering if maybe you'd want to be an official mama first before anything else." Victoria's laugh turned into a tear of pure joy. She slipped the delicate bracelet onto her wrist immediately. It fit perfectly, like it had been made specifically for her. "For the first time in my entire life," she whispered with wonder, "I feel like I've been chosen just for being exactly who I am." Caleb took her hand gently, intertwining their fingers with tender care. They didn't need grand declarations or elaborate ceremonies. Everything that truly mattered was already planted and growing. In the garden they tended together, in Rosemarie's joyful laughter echoing through the mountains, in the tiny threads of a bracelet made with pure hope and love. In the months that followed, Victoria's days overflowed with healing, both her own and that of countless others. The Rosemarie Foundation blossomed with stories of resilience and renewal, women finding their strength again, children smiling for the first time in months, families rebuilding from the ashes of their former lives. Victoria spoke with quiet authority at community gatherings, worked late into the evening with volunteers, and always returned to the mountain ranch that had become her true home. The foundation grew beyond anything she had imagined. They built additional cabins for families in need, established workshops for practical skills, created gardens where healing could happen naturally. Victoria discovered she had a gift for listening, for seeing the person beneath the pain, for offering hope without false promises. Her own journey through darkness had prepared her to guide others toward the light. Caleb proved to be more than just her rescue. He became her partner in every sense, bringing his knowledge of mountain survival, his gentle strength with traumatized children, his ability to make anyone feel safe simply by being present. Together, they created something neither could have built alone. One crisp autumn morning, Rosemarie ran inside from the gardens holding a fresh drawing, her cheeks flushed with excitement and mountain air. "Look what I made," she beamed, practically bouncing with enthusiasm. "It's us planting flowers, but this time we're all holding hands in our forever garden." Victoria knelt beside her and kissed her dirt-smudged cheek tenderly. "Yes, sweetheart, it's exactly that. Our forever garden, where love grows wild and free." The drawing showed their little family surrounded by an explosion of colorful wildflowers, their faces bright with happiness, their hands connected in an unbreakable chain of love. As winter approached, bringing the first snow to dust the mountain peaks, Victoria realized she had found something more precious than all the wealth and status she had left behind. In the gentle rhythm of everyday mountain life, in shared meals around the wooden table, in Rosemarie's bedtime stories about brave princesses who saved themselves, in Caleb's quiet strength that never demanded anything in return, she had discovered what home truly meant. She wasn't just safe from her past. She was actively building a future worth living. She wasn't just surviving. She was thriving in ways she never knew were possible. And when Rosemarie asked her one snowy evening if she was happy, Victoria could answer with complete honesty. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible, my darling girl." The foundation continued to grow, touching lives across the territory. Women arrived broken and left whole. Children learned to trust again. Families found new beginnings in the shadow of the mountains. Victoria's story became legend, whispered around campfires and shared in quilting circles, proof that even the most gilded cage could be escaped, that even the most powerful men could be defeated by a woman with enough courage to choose herself. But Victoria's favorite moments weren't the public victories or the foundation's successes. They were the quiet evening hours when the three of them sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge over the peaks, Rosemarie's head in her lap, Caleb's hand warm in hers, surrounded by the peace they had built together one day at a time. Sometimes family isn't something you're born into. Sometimes it's something you choose, something you build with your own hands and heart, something you nurture with daily acts of love and kindness. Victoria didn't just escape from power and privilege. She walked towards something infinitely more valuable, a little girl who believed in her completely, a man who never asked her to be anything other than herself, and a life where love didn't come with conditions or contracts, only choices made freely every single day. In the mountain stillness, surrounded by wildflowers and wild love, Victoria Ashworth finally understood what it meant to be truly free. And in that freedom, she found not just happiness but joy that ran as deep and pure as the mountain springs that would never run dry. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, comment, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that freedom is always possible. And if you believe in the power of love, healing, and second chances, subscribe to Mountain Tales, because every week we bring you stories that prove kindness is the greatest treasure of all.